Welcome to Post Doom, regenerative conversations exploring overshoot grief, grounding, and gratitude. I'm Michael Dowd, your host. And in this conversation, recorded in July of 2020, thoroughly into a coronavirus era, I speak with Vanessa Blakeslee. Vanessa is an award-winning author of short stories, book reviews, poems, essays, perhaps best known for her train shots and then most recently, Perfect Conditions. I encountered her when I read this incredible essay called Our Permian Paradox, and I immediately said, I gotta have this woman as part of this Post-Doom series. She gets the big picture, including the super scary stuff, and has a really heartful and generous way of holding it all. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, Vanessa, what a delight to see you face to face. I've read some of your stuff, really enjoyed it, and you're held in rather high esteem in the collapse community. And I wanted to invite you at the start here to just help us get you, help anybody who's not familiar with your work, they haven't read you, they're not familiar with, you know, what you're passionate about or known for. Just give us a little bio at the start of what you're either very interested in or passionate about or well known for.
Oh, certainly. Thank you, Michael. And it's so great to meet you at last. This is really a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. So my name is Vanessa Blakeslee. I'm the author of 3 books of fiction, the 2 short story collections, Train Shots and Perfect Conditions, which came out that's my most recent title. It came out in 2018. And I'm also the author of Juventude, which is a novel, which came out in 2015. So I've been very, very busy over the last 10, 15 years with a writing career. I also publish quite a few essays as well, which is how what brought us together to talk today initially, Michael. And I have a recent essay out called The Permian Paradox, which was published by the Smart Set, which is an excellent literary journal out of Drexel University. So that's,
well, you know, I found that particular essay so compelling, so interesting, so obviously, in fact, that's what led me to reach out to you. Say a little bit about that, the Permian Paradox.
That essay was, it's based on it's sort of partly an immersion journalism essay and a travelogue that I wrote probably about 6 months ago. It would have been published sooner had it not been hijacked by the COVID-19 pandemic, because I started sending that out, you know, probably in January, February, and I was anticipating that it would have been published about March. And then, you know, in terms of freelancing, everything just became all pandemic news all the time. And so it took me a while to find a really good home for that. And of course, travel stopped, so all kinds of travel essays. It was no longer sort of in vogue to be talking about travel. And then of course, you know, the oil price crash came, and you know, oil went crazy, and now fracking companies are, you know, going bankrupt. Yeah. So then I thought, oh no, like I hope this will still, the context of this essay will make sense, because so much is changing so rapidly. I really wanted to get it out there, and so it was finally published a couple of weeks ago. So I write quite a few essays. I teach occasionally as well for a small liberal arts college. I wasn't teaching this spring. I'll be teaching it again in the fall.
Where is that?
That's at Rollins College, which is in Winter Park, Florida. So, and I'm in Florida. So, and I've been involved in this, I don't know if you could say, community, I guess, for a few years. I co-hosted for a little while the Extinction Radio series with Mike Farragon, which is, I'm not sure if we'll be resuming that, but did that for a while. And now, and then I pulled back a bit because I had some personal, we've just moved, made a big move in our life with my partner and I, and I'm just kind of getting back into some writing projects. Hopefully, although the novel I was working on, it's things have really changed with the pandemic, so I'm not quite sure how that will impose itself on the manuscript.
Right. Yeah. Say a little bit about the themes that you write on. What fuels or inspires or undergirds much of your writing?
say it would be the how individuals in different parts of the world. I often write about Americans abroad or people abroad are end up grappling with economic crisis, ecological crisis in their own particular lives. So that's sort of what drives me when I write fiction. So my short story collection, Perfect Conditions, has a whole range of stories along those lines. Some are a little more darkly humorous, some are more stark and dystopian, as we've been just talking about previously. I even have one that's a little bit more kind of speculative paranormal, because I love that. I also really like to not forget the mysteriousness of our universe and our existence. I think that's really a big part of what keeps me hanging in there with life and makes it meaningful, is that mystery and sense of awe. I have to keep returning to that. So I always try to imbue that in my work somehow. And for a long time, I was really, really driven by social inequality, the large gap that was happening between the haves and the have-nots. So my first novel, my novel Juventud, is set in Colombia, and that had led me to a lot of research, which really initially sent me down the proverbial rabbit hole, if you will, where I was, prior to that, I'd seen a few documentaries. I knew I was I wasn't completely in the dark about how the US empire or corporate empire worked, but the research I ended up doing for that book on paramilitaries, on how corporations work in developing countries, how that interfaces with the politics of those countries, it really, it was really chilling. It was that was the beginning of my journey and my eyes really being open to how things really work versus the news version of narrative that we get. And so that was quite a lot to digest. And then when that book came out in 2015, and so after that, I kind of came up for air creatively, and you ask yourself, well, what am I going to explore now? And I'd been in that world for so long that I started to look around and say, the environment looks like things are pretty bad. Like things are worse than I realized. And so then I started to do more research there, and started me on my journey of here we are today.
Yeah. Well, I want you to say more about that, but I'd like to first lean into, well, first of all, let me ask, the language that we've been using for this series is post-doom, conversations exploring overshoot, grief, grounding, and gratitude. And I've had a whole wide range of contributors, conversants. And I wanted to ask you first just about the language, like, what do you think of when you think of post-doom? And then what language do you find yourself using in these interesting, contracting, collapsing times?
Well, you just use the word contract, and I think that's perhaps an even more apt word than sometimes, collapse. Is that it's for me, post-doom is a term that really means, indicates that things will be chaotic, that they will be unraveling, and in a way that we have not really experienced in our first world lives. I certainly don't want to speak for people who are in other countries and who are in other circumstances, but that it's really shocking and disorienting, and I think, but yet we're still here, and yet we're putting one foot in front of the other and continuing to live our lives. But we're really, I find myself reeling at, having studied these issues. I don't think, for me, doesn't remove any of the difficulty, or it hasn't yet. I thought it would perhaps do that more, and it doesn't. For actually the real experience of of navigating with friends and family, neighbors, colleagues, the reality of what contraction and destabilization, just what that means. So for me, that's the actual sort of concrete aspect of post-Doom, but also the psychological, spiritual state of asking yourself, well, where does this leave me? How do I reorient myself and my life, and perhaps ways I thought it was going to go that it's not, and and also giving yourself permission to really, you know, denial is part of the stage of all of this. And, you know, I even found myself in the last weeks and months with the pandemic, like slipping back into some denial about it. And I've really changed sort of some of my attitude on that, of being really harsh on people in their denial. And it's like, oh my goodness, you know what? It's really a big part of our survival mechanism to be able to just keep going. And I've ended up really changing some of my, I think, what my perspectives were on that, or how I was becoming a bit too judgmental. I
completely agree.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Connie wrote something about it, and then Damaris Zahner, who writes a blog called Integrity of Life, picked up on a theme that Connie was working with. You know, you could call it adaptive inattention. That is, you're not in denial of climate change. You're not in denial of contraction and, you know, the collapse of the American empire, or the contraction and collapse of industrial society, or whatever. You're not in denial of it. It's just that you got to live on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're a parent or whatever your life situation is, you've got to basically wake up each day inspired to do whatever you can do at whatever level you can, but to have a pretty good life and to not stay in despair. And yeah, adaptive inattention, or other words like that, functional denial. I love
functional
a quote from
denial.
Stephen.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, no, exactly. Stephen Jenkinson, sort of a grief worker guy, grief walker, was a thing done, and one of my favorite conversations that we had in this series was Barbara Cecil and I co-hosted with Stephen Jenkinson. And in an interview that he had somewhere else, he said that inattention, like not paying attention to the world's ecological state, is well advised, because attention to it mitigates against your happiness, your contentment, and your sense of well-being.
Right.
Whatever awakening, whatever spiritual awakening has meant in the past, awakening in our time is to awaken with a sob. I think that's really profound. So I even, when I speak to church audiences or secular groups via Zoom now, I say, hey, don't be in denial, you know, let people and let yourself have some form of adaptive inattention, and be okay with that.
Yeah, you really have to. I've learned that, you know, you really have to allow for that to be a stage. And as we have, many of us have experienced, that those stages are not linear. They are, you know, you go through them and you go, you know, again and again. You know, sometimes it's the anger stage that flares up, then sometimes that dissipates, and, you know, seemingly, and it just, it cycles through in that way. And you know, yeah, you have to allow it to have that place, just so that you can still experience moments of happiness and
joy
with, you know, much as you would, you know, being with kids or your pets, or you know, you have to. Studying all of that I'm really grateful. I mean, for me, it was the correct path. Finding out more about it, understanding about it, because it just enables me to understand that you know, this is what happens. It's okay, actually. You know, it's part of, you know, things have their own cycles, even empires and civilizations, and this wouldn't be really something you know, I think you'd be taught in school. Exactly. And just as everything in the universe does, doesn't it? A star has its cycle. The dinosaurs had their time. Species have their cycle. And it allowing to have that perspective, I found really helpful. And another trick that I have employed throughout my life is pulling back and trying to look at our species from a more detached vantage point, as if I was an alien in a spaceship, and just seeing what's happening and at what point we are. And that has helped with my understanding and acceptance of
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I actually want to invite you to go a little more deeply in that direction. The heart of this series has been to really invite my guests to share their story and take along as long as you want. How did you come to what I'm calling a post-doom mind, a post-doom heart, and post-doom living? Like, how were you raised? What was your worldview like? What were any significant mileposts or transformations that happened, especially any difficult times that ultimately got you to where you are now?
I was raised in rural Pennsylvania from a very middle class, kind of working class, middle class family backgrounds, and was brought up with fairly conservative politics. But I was one of those young people who, from a very young age, sensed that the species I was a part of was. I did not think we were headed for a Star Trek kind of future. From about the time I was 5 years old, whatever I saw on the television, and when my parents explained what nuclear weapons were, I was just, like, oh, this is not gonna turn out well. I didn't necessarily foresee that would perhaps be in my lifetime, but I did not, but nevertheless, I loved books. I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to travel widely. That was very important to me. And so I did that. So I went away to college and took every travel opportunity available to go to New Zealand, Australia, Europe numerous times. And that really helped me connect with the natural world, because even though I'd been raised in a rural environment, we were not a family who went camping or anything like that. So I really developed a love for the wilderness there, hiking, all kinds of, exploring the outdoors. But I stayed in Florida, and went to grad school, and started writing. And at different points in my life, I have become religious. I was very Christian. Actually, went to Catholic church in my mid-20s. I got very, very into Catholicism, but from a more sort of mystical kind of viewpoint of it. I was always drawn to that aspect of religion. And even, I very much would be cut out to be a nun. And I was actually looking into that very earnestly at one point, deciding whether, should I live, I could see myself living a cloistered life as a nun somewhere, a life of service. And but then I sort of did that, I made the decision to, I could be of service as an artist as well, as a storyteller. And then it turns out there are many writers' colonies, and I've gone to many of those places where you essentially are cloistered for periods of time. Oh, exactly. And I love that. And also at those places, which have also, they've frequently been in wilderness locations, that was where I would really find that I was energized by that kind of alone time, that kind of solitude and creativity, which I absolutely love as much as I love being with my partner and in a great relationship with a fellow artist. So all of that has really been the bedrock of my adult life, and is where I do my best to come back to. And that's why, going back to that essay, the Permian Paradox essay, which I tried to capture some of that. That was my vision for that essay, that it would capture this, what I've come to see as the ultimate paradox of our lives. We're living, I as a woman, I'm living a remarkable life, remarkable for, I'm in, a fraction of 1% of probably women who on this planet who don't have to haul water or fear of being, raped in a refugee camp or something, to have the level of liberty and the opportunities I've had. But that has come as a result of the complex civilization, industrial civilization that we have built. So, the crux of that essay was this amazing drive throughout the Southwest, which was a part of the planet I'd never seen, and going to Arches National Park and Canyonlands and all of these places and enjoying all of that splendor, as I have done my whole life, and grappling with the weird, the absolute truth that the very thing that has enabled my life to be that so amazing, and this time is also leading to our undoing. It's really a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable paradox to grapple with. So, and I'd like to explore more of that in my fiction going forward, but I hope that answers some of your.
Yeah, no. Oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad you shared all that.
Mhm.
My background, just real briefly, I was raised Roman Catholic, and then I got involved in my later teenage years in Pentecostal charismatic Christianity, and then my first wife and I got really into neo-paganism and earth honoring forms of and then I spent a week with Thich Nhat Hanh and did Buddhist meditation. I've also done a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. And so I feel fortunate, I feel blessed, privileged that I can be in almost any religious or secular setting, and I don't have a piece of my brain critiquing and judging and assessing it. It's like I feel like I'm capable of operating with different operating systems, different software, operating systems, and I can be in different philosophical and religious contexts and do the interpretation in a way that's just deeply meaningful for me. And I'm grateful for that. And I've never lost that sense, having been raised Catholic, of the sort of the smells and the bells and the ritual and sort of the appreciation of the mystical side of things.
Yeah, I love all that, and that's why I don't, I love what you just said, because I very much get that, because even though I left formally going to church and all of that, I still do. I enjoy ritual. I think all of that is incredibly meaningful. I'm not one to really quickly come down on religion. I think religion can offer people quite a bit at certain stages. At a certain stage, it was really important for me, and that's very personal. And but as of right now, I don't feel a calling to go back to
Yeah,
that.
sure.
But but I feel like the more you can kind of walk there, you can kind of seamlessly um, transition in and out of different belief systems, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm, as an eco-theologian, as someone who, the earth, life, the universe is my religion. Nature is my religion. Evolution and ecology are my two sacred disciplines, you could say. That allows me to interpret the various religious belief systems in a non-literalistic way, which really facilitates things, which really helps. Well, Vanessa, I want to come to some of the things that, anything else that you would like to say that has been supportive or helpful or inspiring, or that tools or practices or books that you've read or people that you've met. What have been some of the things that have been of support to you in this process?
Wow. That's you know, gosh, I would say what I come back to is um, having to cultivate, remind oneself to have gratitude. Um, that is something that actually I've let slip away in the last few months, and I've sort of been overwhelmed with a lot of anxiety about now that the contraction is actually accelerating. I mean, it's not as theoretical feeling as it at least it felt to us. I think some of us in the first world, our lives hadn't really changed very much, and now they are, and things are changing really quickly. I found myself really kind of taken aback by that, and remembering that when I first went through the sort of sucker punch of taking all of this, and that what really pulled me through, and I've called it before a dark night of the soul, when you really realize what our species is facing, along with all the other species
Yes,
on the
exactly.
planet, that it finding a place of gratitude for what I'd already had, what I still had in my life right now, really was my salvation, and helped me shift toward more of a place of how can I help people? How can I be more of service? It kind of
Mm-hmm.
served to redirect my ego, and from that place of like, oh, well, I'm so disappointed because my writing scholarship to Alaska was canceled this spring. All these things. Wait a minute, I thought I had a little bit more time for my career, or, and as someone who is, in mid-adult life, those things are real. I don't want to dismiss them as not being, you do have to acknowledge the disappointments as they come, but you do have to move into a place where you're not paralyzed by this, and knowing factually that this acceleration is going to continue. It is not going to go back.
Right.
It is. So
Exactly.
how are you going to move through that? How am I going to move through it? And so bringing myself back to what am I grateful for? I feel like that sounds really trite.
Well, it actually
But
doesn't, because I think that's really the key. I mean, for me, coming back to finding ways to come back to gratitude and trust.
yeah.
Gratitude for everything in the past and up till now, not everything, obviously, but I can, even those stupidities and, whatever in the past, I can find usually something to be grateful for. And then in the present moment, my God, there's so much I can be grateful for. And then when I look at the future, finding ways to bring me to that heart space of trust, including trusting that we could go extinct in the not too distant future. That's a very real possibility.
Mhm.
So I don't consider it trite at all. Anything that can help an individual or groups of people to come back to consistently, like a compass or whatever, true north of gratitude and trust, to my mind, is a pretty useful thing.
I hadn't thought about trust. That's an interesting one that you bring up. I'm glad you did. And because I think these things, when they're not just words and you're actually experiencing that state of gratitude, trust, they can lead to they open you up in another direction. So I think I find myself also occasionally, and I would like to practice this more, you know, when you feel yourself being judgmental toward people, and asking yourself, like, or finding ways where you can be more compassionate. I mean, and we can use the COVID pandemic as an example. I
Mhm.
see all kinds of, over the social media airwaves, of people just blasting, coming down on people for having a barbecue, and these stories of like, oh, then family members were, even though they were outside and they were trying to stay away from each other, like so many people got sick, and oh, COVIDiots, and these hard, the ways that people are talking, and I found myself responding as, um, why are we shaming and judging people for they're really doing what makes life worth living, which is hanging out with family, and in any other time that is a completely healthy, and well, it's not always healthy depending on how dysfunctional your family is, but but that is a completely normal human behavior. And in many cases, I know in the case of my family, as I said, many of my relatives, I have relatives all across the political spectrum, but a good number of them were conservative. They were on board from the beginning with, they did stay isolated households. They took things quite seriously, but it's months and months later. It's months later. How do we expect people to not see family, to not practically help with what we rely on families for, which is elder care, child care, being there to exchange stories and support each other? And, here we are 6 months into it. Many people did take things seriously from the beginning. Some people didn't. Perhaps too many people didn't, but many people did. And so to now be lambasting them for wanting to get together and have a picnic, which is and to actually think, many people trying to do those things proper, with staying outside and then still getting sick, and then to call them COVIDiots. I think I don't want to, for myself, I don't want to become that person.
Exactly. Well, and my wife created a thing called her COVID Legacy Pledge, where at the age of 68, she said, I don't see death as an enemy. I don't see it as a problem. I'm not afraid of it. And I don't want to be part of the shutting down of the economy and ruining the lives of young people in order to just protect those in my age bracket and older. And so she said, here's my pledge that if I get COVID, I want to ride it out at home. If I survive, great. If I don't, so be it. But I don't want to, clog up the IC units and the things. And she's inviting others, boomers and beyond. She calls it her COVID Legacy Pledge, boomers and beyond, that if they're so led, nobody's forcing anybody. This isn't making anybody do anything, but people who want to say that and then voice that there's a lot of people in their late 60s, 70s, and 80s who aren't all about keep me alive at whatever the cost to the next generation, no matter what. That's not where they're at. They've lived a full life and they want to live honorably and if need be, die honorably, but not completely collapse everything in order to keep alive the most vulnerable. So.
Yeah, I read her pledge. I thought that I really found that a remarkably necessary and honest, refreshingly honest document that, I don't know that I would be quite there yet at my age, although
at your age, 40.
Sometimes I think, but I can see, I think we desperately need a conversation or to broach more of that conversation about quality of life. And we absolutely live in a death phobic culture because we don't see it anymore. I've never been around, unless you work in the medical fields or that kind of, most of us don't see death anymore.
Exactly.
I have not been in a room where someone has died. Just the other day, this is a funny little anecdote. We went to take our compost. We're now living in an interesting place that was an intentional community, founded as an intentional community back in 1946 in Florida, Melbourne Village. It's a historical place, but it really just became a sort of suburban community. But there is a community garden and we have our compost bucket and we took it to dump on the community compost pile the other day. And I flipped back the, tarp or whatever to dump it on the pile. And I was, wow. I mean, it was just like this sort of sludge of decomposting, of banana peels with big giant cockroaches about this long skittering. It was all just kind of writhing it was all it was almost like a cartoon of decomposition, active decomposition. And it kind of gave me a little, I was kind of grossed out, but it kind of gave me a kind of delightful affirmation and a jolt, because that's how infrequently I see death for real. And it gave me this feeling of like, oh, wow, look at that. There's this whole underbelly to the cycle of life that allows life to continue, that flip side of it that we're so afraid of, that allows things to continue. And that's just, I don't know, I know that's probably the silliest little anecdote, but it's just what came to mind. I mean,
no, I call it compost theology because again, I'm an eco theologian. So for me,
Like, wow.
ecology is the heart of theology. And the heart of ecology is the decomposition process, the regeneration process. I mean, that's one of the ways that I actually defined doom and post-doom
Mhm.
is, this idea that doom I see as the midpoint between denial and regeneration, with or without us, that life will
Right.
regenerate with or without us. And most people keep themselves from feeling doom, the emotional feeling of doom, because they're afraid it's going to be the end point. But when you realize it's but the midpoint, and then there's this whole realm on the other side of the post-doom doorway, what Paul Chafurka calls finding the gift, what some have even called it, sort of the importance. Another stage in the stages of grief is gallows humor. And I think that's an important stage, actually.
It's a very important stage. And another funny anecdote was just last night. We were, watching, finding something to stream, and we stumbled upon the Addams Family, and we watched the first couple episodes ever of the Addams. I haven't seen that in, since I was like a little kid. And watching that, realizing what the whole humor of that show was about. She's trimming the roses, but instead of trimming the rose as we would, she's cutting the tops of the roses off and saving the thorns. The whole show, my partner and I looked at each other and said, this is about entropy. This is about, all of the humor of it flips our typical norms of the way we look at things. They're all about death, celebrate it, and it's and also there's this sort of sexiness in that show between them that was not really allowed in the other, the shows of that time between husbands and wives, but yet it was sort of permitted. I don't know, in the world of it. It's very, very funny. It was that we just stumbled upon that last night. It was like, this whole show is about entropy, and acknowledging that in our life is not, I don't know, the overarching culture is not. And I mean, in terms of the essay, Permian Paradox, I knew I wouldn't get it published someplace mainstream. I would have loved to have that essay, and I queried all of those places first: The Guardian, NPR, National Geographic, you name it. And I thought, if they take this essay, they will want some kind of call to action at the end. They would ask me to revise it with some paragraph about renewable energy or something, and they will. And so I was satisfied with, I thought, I will find a smaller, respectable, more literary outlet who will just take it as it is without some kind of ending on it that I don't really want to tack on.
Well, Connie and I love the ending exactly as it is, and so we're grateful that you didn't have it published and have to add a happy chapter. I mean, there's so many people who talk about collapse or contraction or the inevitable devastation that we've been wreaking and that sort of thing, feel compelled for one way or another, either internally or externally, to add a happy chapter at the end. If we all just do this, then and so I deeply appreciate authors, artists, movie makers that don't feel compelled to add a happy chapter. That's one of the reasons why I consider William Catans' book Overshoot, that was written in 1980, to be the most important book I've ever read, because he doesn't have a happy chapter.
Me too. That's interesting you say that. When people ask me, what are the most important books you've ever read, I consistently come back to that one because it so blew my mind when I read it, came upon it a few years ago. Probably.
Okay. So say more about that. So how did you learn about Catans Overshoot? Tell me about it, because it really is central to Connie's and my life.
Yes.
And to a number of people in this series who also feel similarly.
Yeah, I think I've never taken an ecology class per se. I mean, I've read read some nonfiction and taken some biology classes and things like that, but I haven't ever really taken an ecology class. But when I started entering these conversations online about the predicament that we are in, you come across numerous books, and there are certain blogs too, which I found to be really excellent in my understanding of really peak oil and resources and environment. And again, I really I tried to come into my questions completely unbiased. I had no idea what, peak oil was another term. I thought, what's that? Like, it's not something a common person knows about or thinks about. I had never thought about energy in my life. I remember that term kind of coming up a lot in the mid 2000s, and then it seemed to go away, so I set about researching both of these things and realized that, many in the peak resource camp sort of, they don't want to believe in the environmental impacts as much. They want to believe that that's not going to be as bad as it is. And then conversely, the climate change, that camp, all about the environment, but not really wanting to believe that, still wanting to believe that an industrial renewable civilization could keep us going. But I wasn't vested in either camp. So, realizing when you put the whole picture together, is like, oh, it's all happening. But then finding I wanted to do deeper reading as well. So I went from reading blogs such as Gail Tverberg's excellent blog, Our Finite World, Tim Watkins' blog,
Watkins,
The Consciousness of Sheep.
Sheep.
Yes, The Consciousness of Sheep. He's so clear in his explanations, as I find Gail to be, but he's so clear, and he's a really eloquent writer as well. I mean, his essays.
Oh, he really is.
He really is.
He really is.
So,
and I've interviewed both of them. I've interviewed both of them as part of the series.
Yeah. So, but I went from reading those blogs to, then certain books come up that Joseph Tainter's Collapse of Complex Societies, I read that. And the Catton book was, the Overshoot was one of those too. And, these books are, I mean, for me, they were, I read them as much as as voraciously as another reader would turn the pages of a sultry romance. I mean, that's what a,
or another way of saying that is my copy of Catans Overshoot, because I've not only read it, but I've recorded it unofficially with the publisher's permission. And what's nice about recording the unofficial audiobook of something is that when I move to Tears by Catans Generosity of Soul, you can hear it. I keep the mic on. You can hear me sobbing, and you hear Connie sobbing on the couch listening to me. And after all the great paragraph, probably 2 or 3 dozen times throughout the book, I say, now that paragraph was so good, I'm going to read it again. And so it alerts the audio listener, hey, wake up out of your trance. This is an important paragraph. And my copy of Catans Overshoot is marked up like I when I was a fundamentalist Christian, like I marked up my Bible. I mean, it was underlined everything. I mean, it is like scripture for me.
Well, it again, it's another book that lays things out so clearly about, and he doesn't cave, even though this. How can it not be emotional when, I mean, this is your species you're talking about, or others talking about that this is as sobering as it gets, to realize, well, we are subject to the same laws and, laws of physics, natural law, as all of our fellow mammals. And really, why shouldn't that be? But we take it personally. But the book is just, it even struck me even more viscerally, I suppose, because I just read it a few years ago. And when was it published? Perhaps in 82 or 8?
1980 was when it was published in hardback, and 1982 it's softback.
Yeah. So he speaks here and there to, there are some time markers in there about, when he, about the point where we were then, and in the way he talks about where we will be in 40 years or so, and realizing, it's extremely sobering to realize, well, we are right on point. And as with the Club of Rome study, the limits to growth trajectory as well. So here we are. The facts are what they are for those who can, dare to stomach to acknowledge them and accept them. So yeah, I mean, his book is really, I feel like those books together, again, for some people they may be dry and academic, but it kind of depends, I think, on the type of reader you are, or
yeah, I mean, Tainter's book is a little more dry and academic than Catans Overshoot in my experience.
Yeah.
But at any rate, yeah, for anybody watching or listening to this conversation, if you just go to postdoom.com, which is where all of the interviews in this series exist, and just click on the resources page, right underneath my first two videos, which is on post-doom thinking and living, you'll see that my SoundCloud playlists, and I have a William Catton SoundCloud playlist and many other saints, as it were, older brothers and sisters, mentors on the path. But I've a huge piece of my own legacy work has been furthering the legacy of those who I see as the most important contributors in the 20th and early 21st century. And so I've recorded like 1,000 hours, and it's all freely available up on SoundCloud. So if you just put my SoundCloud Michael Dowd or SoundCloud Grace Limits is the title of my thing, you'll find all my playlists, and I encourage you to check that out. Wow. Well, Vanessa, anything that you would like to say to sort of bring this conversation to completion for yourself? Anything? I had sent you the list of the questions that I had been inviting others to ask. Anything that you'd really like to address that we haven't covered yet?
I've thought a lot lately about quality of life, and as we continue to, here we are, and we're still putting one foot in front of the other. I think we're all at a point in time where it's useful, I mean, completely including myself in this, to question, how much information we're taking in, how much do we, because I don't believe our brains are equipped to deal with the flood of what is out there in the media, especially. If anything, we should probably be doing more deeper reading on any kind of
news fasting, perhaps.
Yeah.
News fasting,
News fasting, which but how realizing how things are probably going to go, that I've had the tendency in the past to think really vividly and catastrophically about things. And I think that's also part of our Hollywood, I call it the Hollywood effect of, we see things like, disaster movies and imagine that we will be in that, when, often our life and perhaps our own unraveling will be a lot more mundane. Might be a lot more mundane. It very well could involve, moving back in with family or neighbors, or, things like that, having to do, caregiving. My partner and I just moved back in. We had already planned this in the previous couple of years to move on to his mother's property. She's 92. So realizing that a lot of how we might be of service to people, when you ask people, well, what do we feel like we can do, or what that we should do that is meaningful, a lot of it might be very close to home, and that even just being there for caring for our family members and neighbors, doing what we can. I'm not really active locally in environmental issues. I do have some friends, though, who are, and who definitely after the 2016 election decided to really become active locally. So for some people that is their path. But it's not a small thing to just be very present for the people in your life as they go through this. And I'm thinking about this a lot because I'm going to be teaching again this fall. And I've been thinking about young people, and my partner says I dwell on this. I fret about this a little too much about, you know, the students and what they need from me. And, you know, you don't get paid very much when you're teaching an adjunct class. It's almost like a stipend. But I mean, for me, it's really important though, because I mean, it's just thinking about where these young people are. My goodness, I know how I feel in these times. I'm 40 years old, they're 20 years old, and trying to figure out how I might meet them where they are. And I'm teaching creative writing, but you know, how I can just make the class fun and meaningful and bring some relief to their lives and not add more stress.
Exactly.
And you know, maybe that's enough this fall. You know, that's between, you know, caring for our family duties or our family responsibilities and taking that on. And that's okay. You know, we don't have to take up some Joan of Arc cross, and, you know, that's not necessarily what's asked of us.
Amen. Well, you know, it's interesting because much of my work over the last 18 years has been speaking in secular and religious contexts, you know, basically where science, inspiration, and sustainability intersect. That's our, you know, our passion. And yet now, because we're in a coronavirus era, that most moderate to liberal Christian and Unitarian Universalist and other religious settings and secular groups aren't meeting in person a whole lot. I can do most of what I do via Zoom homilies, Zoom sermons, Zoom follow-up programs, Q&A sessions, like I'm having one tonight. And it's interesting because my youngest daughter, who's 30, she just turned 30 a few days ago, gave birth 2 months ago to my youngest granddaughter. I've got a almost 10-year-old granddaughter and now a 2-month-old granddaughter.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, you know, I went through my own transformation in terms of like, would I be okay with them getting pregnant when I learned that?
Yeah.
And fortunately, it shifted radically for me, and I was hugely grateful. But my point, though, is that when I think about my life and where can I make the biggest difference, where can I contribute, given my gifts and given my limitations, we will quite possibly settle down in the Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area come, you know, a little less than a year from now, because we've got places lined up. We're going to be at where Thomas Berry, one of my great mentors, is buried, at the Green Mountain Monastery in northern Vermont. We're scheduled to be there for almost 5 months as caretakers over the winter. But then after that, we're quite possibly going to, you know, find a little cheap place to within walking distance of my daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter, and be of support to family. And continue to do what I do via Zoom, and Connie continues to do what she does.
Right.
She's one of the main point people in assisting trees and migrating poleward to, you know, a major book just came out called The Journeys of Trees by Zach St. George that features her from throughout the whole book. So we can do that based in a place where we can be of service to family. So that's
right.
probably
Oh, fantastic. Right. Well, I think we're going to increasingly find ourselves doing more of that, and family and neighbor units, you know, are
absolutely
working together. And again, we have to keep in mind that there can be some really great outcomes that come out of this as our lives continue to progress. I mean,
or as our lives continue to simplify, because I'm
maybe
not crazy
progress
about the word
is, progress is not the word to me. As our lives meander along. I don't know. They might be meandering a little bit more.
I like John Michael Greer's admonition to that it would be good for us, for our souls and our world, to adapt to less, L-E-S-S, less energy, less stuff, less stimulation.
We will be, whether we like it or not. And it's a great reminder too, because I went through this too when my sister had a baby in the last year or two. I'm wondering how I would feel about it. And I actually I love my nephew. And I think we do have to a continuing lesson for us as individuals and as a society is going to be thinking about quality of life and what quality of life means regardless of quantity of years, and really adjusting our perceptions, our views of that. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Amen. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. This has been a real treat for me. And just blessings on your writing, blessings on this adjunct course that you'll be doing. And I'll as soon as this is edited, I'll send you the link.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, this is wonderful talking to you. So look forward to sometime doing it again. Thank you.
For more information about this project, go to postdoom.com.